You're up.
My name's Anna Maria Vera. I'm the Housing and Loan Program Officer for the City of Rock Island in the Community Economic Development Department. And I am going to give you some information on the Mexican Festival in Rock Island. So I don't know how much information you guys have already, but basically it's an outdoor festival with live music, art, street vendors that will highlight and showcase Mexican culture and heritage. We're looking to do this August 8th, 2020 in Schwiebert Park. We would like to focus on the Mexican culture and heritage specifically because they are the largest demographic within the Hispanic population, not just locally, but nationally as well. Here I have a couple of the people that will be assisting the City of Rock Island and the committee to put this together. Greg is from Q 2030, from the Chamber of Commerce, and then Daisy is from the YMCA. Zenaida Landeros, which is the director of the Quad City Hispanic Chamber, will be assisting as well, but she was not able to make it today. So aside from those brief bullet points, the other thing from this festival is that the proceeds that we make from the festival will then be turned into grants that will be empowerment grants that are going to be run by the Hispanic Chamber that will benefit Hispanic business owners in either opening a business, relocating a business, or opening a second location of an existing business to the City of Rock Island. Do you guys have any questions?
I'm curious, I don't know much of anything about this. I'm sorry
Okay.
to say. I'm curious as the background, where did the idea come from? You know, just sort of, this is great. I'm very excited and thankful for those that have gotten us to this point. But just this popped out of nowhere, so I'm just curious.
Well,
What's the backstory?
One of the things that we've been working on in the CED department is figuring out how to engage all elements of the population. And we started to look at it kind of like a big pie, right? Everybody's a small little slice of the pie. And we've done rather well so far engaging the LGBTQ community with Clock Inc. And that was very, very well received, and we actually made some great strides there. And I've been trying to think about the last 2 years, how do I engage the Hispanic population? And Anna and I sat down, we talked about it, and she said, you throw a party. You throw a festival, an event. And we started talking a little bit more, and it wasn't just let's have music, it's let's have food, let's have performers, but let's also do art as well. Try to round out the entire cultural experience. And so, obviously I am not Hispanic, so I said, I need some help. She helped me, she created her group, and they've all been very supportive. They've been meeting on this, and so until we really got some legs behind it, we wanted to kind of make sure we had it going before we bring it up in front of council.
Okay. Anybody else?
Come on down, Greg.
So, how I got involved is that the City of Rock Island, as all communities in the Quad Cities, have endorsed Q 2030, our regional action plan. Part of that, underneath the Creative People pillar, is welcoming and inclusive. How do we create more welcoming and inclusive communities throughout the entire Quad Cities? Also, how are we going to retain our talent? A lot of talent likes to stay where they feel comfortable, where they feel a connection. So when Ana Maria reached out and saying, hey, can you help? I said, absolutely, I'm happy to do this, because this is a great way, again, to celebrate diversity, to show that Rock Island has always been and will continue to be a welcoming and inclusive city. But also what makes this a little bit different is we have other festivals in the Quad Cities that celebrate all Hispanic culture, the Latino culture, with Viva Quad Cities, which celebrates everything Hispanic. And as we know, Hispanic is anyone who speaks Spanish. If you're from a Spanish-speaking country, Hispanic. Now, if you're from Brazil, which is part of Latin America, not considered Hispanic. Now, Latino, anyone from Latin America, the Caribbean, South America, that's Latino, does not include Spain. Of our Hispanic or Latino community in the Quad Cities, the largest demographic of Latinos are from Mexico, specifically the state of Guanajuato. And so, since this fiesta was celebrating all things Mexico, the charreada, the charro, the food, the music, we thought, you know what, why not embrace that? Let's embrace a Mexican fiesta, and it's the only one of its kind here in the Quad Cities. And Rock Island had the perfect setup. I think Rock Island, I don't think, I know Rock Island has been a leader in the inclusion space for very many years. And I said, hey, let's try this. And so as we got our group together, the group continued to grow. Support of Q2030, the Quad Cities Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, YMCA. And we just want to help create an environment that's going to be attractive to everyone and anyone who wants to celebrate the Mexican culture.
Have you discussed possible locations yet? Have you gotten that far?
Yeah, we're looking at Schwiebert Park.
It's a good place, good location,
Thank you.
yeah,
Anyone else have any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah. Looking forward to next year. Let us know how we can help.
And we move to Stephanie for the new revenue study.
Yes. Could the man behind the curtain put my presentation up, please?
The man behind the car.
All right, so I'm glad we're getting started just a little bit early because I was hoping the target to wrap up this discussion is about 5:45. So we do have two very important study sessions after this presentation. So we'll just kind of play it by ear. Hopefully we can get through it all tonight. If not, we'll convene and continue to talk about it. This is only a snippet of things that we can talk about. So the revenues that we're going to look at tonight are selected as a result of questions that both Randy and I have received over the last 12 to 24 months, questions by council as you are reading National League of Cities and IML and IGFOA things, what other communities are doing. And so this is really, really important discussion. So what we'll review tonight is we'll actually start with a really quick snapshot of the general fund revenues and expenditures, because these revenue ideas are actually generally revenues that would support the general fund in particular. The general fund we know is challenging to budget. It is primarily supported by taxes and fees, and a lot of the expenses in the general fund are staff providing services to our citizens and businesses. So we're going to talk about the general fund expenditures and revenues, and these are the particular ideas that we're going to focus on tonight. Would like to take questions or comments after each of the revenues we talk about, and I will take notes just so that I can remember what we talked about. Each one is a little bit different. With some, I'll provide some data, examples of other communities that might be doing it, pros and cons possibly, and in some cases, what if scenarios, basically estimating revenues given certain parameters. So with that, a quick look at general fund revenues. Actually, we'll start with expenditures rather. So I always say, our expenditures are anywhere from 60 to 80%, generally 70% payroll related. So here's your snapshot of general fund expenses for this year's budget, $37 million expenditure budget with $28 million representing various components of personnel expenses, largest being salaries, second largest being pension costs. And then revenues, 73% of revenues are tax related, so $36 million in revenues budgeted this year. The largest components, property taxes, that top line, and then you see subsets of local taxes and subsets of state taxes and other types of revenue. With the property taxes of $8.5 million supporting the general fund, all but $1.7 million is funding our police and fire employer contributions. And that's just a slide of the trend of the last few years, and then given certain projections if we weren't to make adjustments and changes going forward. That's our trend line for expenditures. It's a basic picture of the story, without changes or deferring of certain expenditures or holding positions open, which is how we tend to balance the budget these last few years, like any municipality. Expenditures are naturally rising, revenues aren't rising quite as fast, which is what brings us here today to talk about new revenue ideas. So with that, we'll get started with the first one. Payment in lieu of taxes, often referred to as pilot. I know it's a lot to read, but I'll just kind of highlight some of the components of pilot. Basically, payment in lieu of taxes is representing revenue to a municipality in lieu from organizations that aren't paying property tax. So they're receiving services, and pilot would be property tax revenue that's lost because of tax-exempt ownership. A couple of background points: the federal government is not subject to taxation by state or local governments. The third bullet point, the highlights is that in some states, the state government reimburses local governments for part of the tax revenue that they would otherwise receive from colleges and universities. Illinois is not one of them. And then in other cases, institutions might make a direct payment to the local government. In the last bullet point, payment in lieu of taxes for nonprofit organizations are voluntary, and when generally we talk about nonprofit organizations, we're talking about churches, hospitals, etc. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but in general, payment in lieu of taxes is not common in the state of Illinois. The last sentence of that last bullet point also talks about nonprofits having some heartburn at the thought of talking about paying for services. We know that they struggle, especially with late payments, et cetera, from their granting providers usually. So, in preparing for the study session, one of the things that we did was look at the list of parcels that the city has. The list of parcels comes from the county, and sorted it by assessed value. Minimum first, 0. So we have actually quite a few properties here in Rock Island that are not assessed at all because they're tax exempt generally. So we have almost 16,000 parcels, and almost 690 of those have an assessed valuation of 0, and did provide a little bit of information about the quantity for the largest quantities, and the largest being Augustana College, but also the Housing Authority, Alleman High School, the hospital, etc. The rest of that list is mostly government agencies, the city of Rock Island being one of them. Of course, the county, lots of churches, and some nonprofits.
Stephanie,
Yes.
I'm sure you know this already. Trinity Hospital's Unity Point.
Yes. Yeah, and that's actually how it's listed on their tax bills. So that's where I grabbed it off of. So they might be doing business as, but I actually got this information off of the tax rolls. So it did reference it as Trinity.
Okay.
Okay, but yeah, I know.
We all know what we're talking about.
Definitely. So it is my understanding that Illinois state law does allow taxing districts to enter into agreements with tax-exempt properties. With all of the study session items tonight, I do internet searches and, try to look for other examples. It's really hard to find them here in the state of Illinois. So examples are limited, but when you search it generally, there's other states that have pilots, and especially in the Northeast, it's very popular, and you can find a lot of references. One thing that we have learned in the last couple of years is that the Housing Authority does remit a payment in lieu of taxes, and that's that first slide I mentioned, that the federal government can make arrangements with states. So there actually is an old, long-standing agreement where the Housing Authority does remit a payment. It goes directly to the county, and the county distributes it, and so could see that. And so we do get about $16,000 a year. And then when you do find examples of municipalities in Illinois with a pilot, it's often their own utility system, which is interesting. Springfield has a huge one, about $9 million that they charge their utilities. Of course, Springfield also has power which, power and electric, which isn't necessarily common. But DeKalb has one, Park Forest, my prior employer, had one. And the concept is that the utility is basically a business, that's not paying taxes. The downside is that then you're recovering that payment in lieu of taxes to the municipality through user fees. And, we certainly have a lot of things that we need to have user fees for to continue to pay for our infrastructure and such. And sometimes that last example you see, the city of Champaign has one with a business. So Kraft Foods is just outside of the city limits, and they desire to have city services be extended to them, specifically public safety. And so with that, they didn't want to be incorporated into the city limits. Instead, they arranged for a payment in lieu of taxes. So kind of interesting. So for this revenue, there's not enough data to estimate if we did have a tax. It's really rather complicated. This link is actually a great resource of case studies from the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy's 2010 report. If we were to move forward, would definitely want to study this. And if we were interested in pursuing, I would recommend that the first step would be to evaluate the city services that are provided to those tax exempt properties and just do some data collection. How many calls for service, estimate what the calls for service are, and start there and just look at what services are we providing. And then, if to move forward, it would be a larger group that would have to be part of this discussion. It would not be popular, as taxes often aren't. Any questions, comments, crying?
So
Okay.
is that something that council wants to move forward on?
Researching, sure.
Well, I mean, this is the research. We would then attempt to do it, I guess. That's what we want to get. What we want to get out of the session tonight is, what does the council want to do with these new revenue ideas?
Sounds like the proposal here is to just evaluate what services we're offering to these institutions and get the data.
It is. We put together a task force, and then we would approach, and then we come back to the council and then approach these different organizations with what we think a proper annual fee would be. I mean, so are you interested in pursuing nonprofits paying these pilots?
I would be interested in doing the study of the task force. Do you have any rough estimate of how long that would take?
Several months, probably.
I would think.
Chandler's done it before. It's a multi-year process to get this together, so.
The task force is multi?
No, the whole thing of pilots. So the task force we'd put together this fall, and then,
Yeah, it's not like we're gonna next month go out to all of our neighbors and say, hey, here's a bill that we came up with tomorrow. No, we're gonna be figuring out a reasonable assessment. Hey, here's the number of police calls, fire calls, whatever. Here's what that costs us. And then perhaps you roll it into like working on deals, like if we're gonna do a development agreement or something to that effect, or some sort of agreement with a nonprofit, include language in there that they will participate in a pilot program, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be, here's the bill, you want to pay it? No, nobody wants to pay it, but we can start being a little bit more intelligent in how we work with these neighbors. Hey, if the city's gonna help with this over here, can you help us with this over there? Right? I mean, is that a reasonable?
yeah, it would be a little more than that. We'd actually go ask them to actually pay something in addition to what you're talking about, because we do that already with Augustana. We have those kind of conversations. This, we would actually approach the hospitals and whoever, whatever nonprofits, were on this list of saying, and start the discussion, and that takes some number of months or years. But we don't want to move forward with this unless the council is serious about pursuing this, because then it's just a waste of time. So that's what we're trying to figure out, if the council seriously wants to move after these pilots.
No, it's just.
I would say no.
Don't, if they just sit on the land development, you charge them more of a fee.
No.
I say no. I mean, I don't know if I'm on or not. I think, I'm sorry, nonprofits have no money. with the changes in the tax laws, they have less donations than they have before. Several nonprofits are just hanging on by the skin of their teeth, and this will put them out of business. Trinity Hospital, while it's great to have 3 hospitals here, there's a merger that's happening, and the reality is perhaps we will lose our hospital. So, I mean, I think we need to tread really carefully here.
What would it do for Friendship Manor? What would it do for Friendship Manor?
It would not, they pay property taxes.
Or your nonprofit?
They're one of our largest property taxpayers. We appreciate them very much.
Well, I think all nonprofits are not the same.
It wouldn't be like an individual small nonprofit, you know, with 3 people working there. There'd have to be some city services that would go. So typically it's a little larger, like the housing authority does give us some money, but or the college is a perfect example. We use a lot of police and fire services that go into that. They respond to calls there, and we're not compensated at all for that.
How is it fair to me as a property taxpayer, or, you know, or anybody else around here that we pay property taxes to fund those services, but our neighbors don't? I mean, you can look at it from that perspective as well, right? It's not ideal, but our financial situation, either way you look at it, is not ideal. So my whole thought with all of these proposals is, hey, it's less property taxes that we'll have to raise, right? And that's the ultimate goal here, in my opinion, is the less we have to keep going back to property taxpayers who are already the greatest share of our revenue, or maybe not the greatest share of our revenue, but, you know, they feel
Well, I
like.
think we need to be careful, though, because if we just focus on the property taxes, the citizens are gonna look at tax as a tax. They're not worried about if it's property tax, beverage tax.
Sure.
Don't use the plastic straw tax. I know that has come up in Cook County, where I have some friends up there, and they were just, I mean, almost rebellious with some of the taxes that were imposed in Cook County. So I think we need to tread lightly.
And again, I
I don't
think,
think you can make a conclusion, at least I can't, until you have some more information.
I agree.
Hence the task force,
Yeah.
to at least provide us with some more information. And then try to make a decision.
Okay.
I mean, I think it might be worth a discussion, like with Augustana and Alleman, and even the hospital, if, you know, have a conversation with them. Would they be willing to pay some?
it's really all that we can do. We can't force them to pay it.
Have to plow the roads.
So, yeah, I think that's all that we're proposing here.
Okay, so we'll do some data collection. So the next one is storage facility fee. So the city of Rock Island has an estimated 1,800 storage units. So when we say storage units, approximately doors, you know, not necessarily freestanding buildings. Our neighbor to the west, Iowa, they do tax storage facility services. They have a different sales tax system than the state of Illinois, but that rate is 6.5%. Illinois does not tax, but we should be mindful that they have considered it. It's been in recent legislative agendas to consider it. This is one of those fees or taxes that you can Google in the state of Illinois and see quite a few examples. So I do provide 3 of them here for you and what their tax is. And so nothing local, however, but Village of Morton Grove has a tax of 5% of the gross rental or lease. River Grove has an annual license fee that's related to the square footage of each unit. And then they also have a registration fee that applies to that type of business. And then the city of North Chicago is similar to Morton Grove. So here, just kind of put forth a what-if scenario. What if we had a $5 per month on average? Because I would assume if we did this, we would have different rates for different sizes of units. But if on average it was $5 per month, that would equate to $108,000 in revenue annually. And then you have some breakouts of different monthly rates, anywhere from $3 to $6, what that range of rates would be.
And for every
thoughts, questions?
For every 1% that we raise property taxes, we get about 100,000, right?
Correct.
So that's 1% less that we would have to rely on property taxes.
And I've been approached by a few people about this very idea that are in support of it. You have my support for it. If people can have the ability to pay for space to store their extra stuff that they don't want, and they want the privilege of storing it in Rock Island, they can pay a tax for that. I don't know why we're not taxing it. In the 7th Ward, we have Storage Hub that just was recently converted, and we also now have the U-Haul. There's some revenue sources. That's what we're talking about. I don't care if the state's not going to put it in their state budget, we can still tax it. So yes, you have my support on this one.
Interesting note on U-Haul is we are starting to get rental tax from them. I noticed that on a
They have
recent
all that
report I was
storage
looking
and
at.
space, and also the,
Vehicles.
we just had the grand opening for the old Bear Manufacturing Building. That's now American Storage. Those are all units too.
So I have
Yeah,
a
it's like
question.
1,800, as Stephanie mentioned, there are quite a few.
Yeah, I have a question. Are you taxing the storage lockers that are rented out, or all the storage lockers, whether they're rented or not?
My recommendation from an administration standpoint would be to tax each unit itself, each door, if you will.
Whether it's rented out or not?
Be similar to what the Village of River Grove does. They do it per square footage, we do it per unit.
Did it take a
But
lot of
same
extra
thing.
reporting on the storage owners?
Not for per unit, it wouldn't.
It would be more.
You know, it would be if it were rented, but per unit would be very easy for anybody.
Well, we had all these 3 big industrial spaces that no longer are producing tax revenue for the city. They are bragging about how many indoor storage units that they are. Let's tax them. Go for it.
And that's where the square footage, might be a useful way to delineate what
The
the,
industrial
what the
spaces.
fee would be.
The industrial space isn't being used anyway, so let's just tax it.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So we'll come back then with a recommendation to implement this to council. And I know it's one council's been talking about for a while, so,
Favor about this, Randy?
yes. And we talked to U-Haul when they came in, and they were,
That was
Chandler
what
can
we
tell
did.
you, they were in favor of it. They said it wouldn't, it's unlikely that a fee would chase someone over to Moline. They're gonna wanna store right close to their house rather than drive across the Quad Cities.
$1 a year, yeah.
Yeah, so,
It's also a reality of our Amazon era. How many of our retail locations are being converted into storage space? It's a weird reality where you can't buy anything in your physical location, but you can store everything, right? It's weird. So, I mean, just like you were saying, Mayor Pro Tem, about a tax is a tax, but people are paying less in sales taxes in the city of Rock Island because there's no retail here, so as that goes down, this goes up.
Stephanie, this is a no-brainer.
I like no-brainers, that's good. And we have examples to go by for Dave to review. So, great. All right. So the next two are more environmental related fees or taxes. And the first one we'll talk about is the plastic bag tax. Fun data fact, a grocery bag has a 12-minute lifespan. And of course, we know they decompose slowly, mostly. The cons, if we were to have such a tax, is frustration by businesses. This is not common, but there are examples in the state of Illinois, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And the last con I mentioned here is it's not stable, not a stable revenue source. So it's kind of like a red light camera. You know, when municipalities install red light cameras, that initially, ooh, you get all this money. But then we learn, you know, as drivers to avoid that intersection, come to a complete stop before you turn right, don't blow the intersection. And so it tends to decline. And so that would be much the same with, I think, this kind of tax. And plus, you know, I would say we're already seeing people use less
Well, and we've
plastic
seen,
bags.
And we've seen businesses locally downtown just recently change their policy where if you pay cash, it's this certain amount. But if you're gonna use your credit card, there's now a new 3% fee on it. Maybe people bitched and moaned for the first couple times they did it, now you're just prepared for it. So it just changes cultural behavior as well. So perhaps maybe that revenue source goes down, but we still did the right thing. People are still going to shop at Hy-Vee because they love Hy-Vee and their prices. They just know that they're going to have a tax on the bags, or, oh, God forbid, they bring their own.
Sure, the Aldi model.
I'm in favor of this one.
Okay, so let's talk about some examples that are in place right now. The city of Chicago has had a checkout bag tax. Oftentimes that's actually what it's referred to if you're Googling this checkout bag. They have a checkout bag tax since 2017. It's 7 cents. They share it with the retailer, and that is actually a common practice when there is such a tax, that the retailer retains some of it. There certainly is an administration burden on them as well. They do have some guidance on who it applies to. In the case of City of Chicago, it's pretty much all retailers. We'll see some differences as we move down the page. With Oak Park, they've had one in place for a couple of years. It's actually 10 cents, shared 50-50 with the city. And they've structured their tax where it only applies to certain sizes of retailers, so a retailer over 5,000 square feet. And this is kind of a theme too, their revenue goes to their sustainability fund to promote sustainability, and they do have fines associated as well. Evanston has had this on the books for quite a while, and they actually they don't have a tax, they prohibit distribution of free disposable plastic shopping bags for large retailers over 10,000 square feet. A couple of examples of municipalities that considered this and then didn't pass it, and Oswego and River Forest are two of them. It is important to note this, and this could change how we're thinking about this topic, is that the state of Illinois, Governor Pritzker has proposed a checkout bag tax, and in the legislation that went to the assignments committee in the last session, it actually preempts municipal and county authority to have a tax. So that would just squash it all together, and the state of Illinois would have one. So we'll have to watch that and see how that goes. There, it's hard to say if that'll come back or not, but a lot of states have legislation that prohibits a local bag tax. I provide you some examples, and then California does ban, but businesses must charge 10 cents per bag, and they can keep it. So interesting examples. Just a quick what-if scenario. It's always kind of fun to play with Excel. If there were 15,000 shoppers in Rock Island, each of us using 150 bags annually, if it was a 5-cent tax, the revenue would be 112,000 approximately.
I have a question, Stephanie.
Yes.
If you go back one slide to the different municipalities, I noticed that Oak Park also includes paper bags. I assume it says paper and plastic bags.
Mm-hmm.
Are we looking at that as well, or just plastic bags?
It's up to your discretion. I don't know. I think the focus has been plastic, and maybe that's why when you Google it, it often refers to as checkout bag, and not so much plastic bag.
Well, I know from my experience, the plastic bags are the ones that are up in my pin oak tree after they've blown across the fence from somewhere else.
Sure.
And paper bags don't seem to be as much of a problem, but
More likely to be recycled, probably too. So thoughts?
We can't recycle plastic bags in our curbside recycling, correct?
I don't believe we can.
No, you can't, but Jewel Osco, Moline, and Hy-Vee have the
Containers near the door.
containers that will
Yeah.
recycle them for you. I'm all for this. I think this is a great idea. It's good for the environment. It's providing another revenue source, and I have a serious doubts that Hy-Vee's going to back out of their beautiful location because we're imposing a tax on consumer behavior.
But we can't do anything till we find out what the state's doing.
I think we should still pursue it because who knows how long it's going to take for something at the state to get done.
Well, we could. It would just be then the state would have an additional tax on it. It'd be,
Would it be an additional
No, I think it
tax, or would
preempts us from
preempt
having
does
a
it
tax.
preempt us from doing it? Okay.
It would cut ours out.
We could still do it, and then if it,
Stop doing it.
That's a 1,500 or 15,000 bags out of the landfill that I care about.
I guess my suggestion is, so you don't waste your time, is just wait and see what the proposed 2020 budget is. If they don't put it in the budget and it doesn't move forward, then we can try it for a year and see.
Isn't the 2020 budget, hasn't that already been adopted, though? Or do you mean the next budget?
So now it would probably be their 2021 budget, correct? Yes. Which they're at June 30th year end.
I heard the beaches needed it earlier.
Other thoughts?
I would move forward with it.
Yeah.
I do like the idea, if we are going to go forward with it, I like the idea of having a certain portion of it being remitted back to the business.
Keep Rock
I
Island
think-
beautiful.
I think that would be a sign of
It could
wanting to work with them, maybe, I guess. You know, it's better than just saying, hey, we're gonna tax it and take it all. It's recognizing that there might be some customers venting their frustration at their employees, or if there's any sort of administrative side of it, that they need to track how many bags that they're selling now or something like that. That sort of makes up for that part of it, so.
I think, having it be reinvested into like Shreveport Park, or having some of the revenue go into some type of a fund that Keep Rock Island Beautiful can access is a win-win for everyone.
Well, and that's a thought, 'cause Keep Rock Island Beautiful is, the city's portion is funded through gaming funds.
Free up 25.
And so we could free up some funds if we were to do it. Okay, we'll
Hey,
continue.
with, how much does our pension bill increase every year?
Well, this year was a little more than usual, but 6 to 7% on average. It's on a big number.
Millions.
So, yeah, over $1 million every year. Like, what's it called in finance?
Something.
It's not linear, it's
Compounding.
yeah, it's compounding, right? It's not like we're just having to pay another million, it's another million on top of that, and on top of that, so. The expenses, as our graph at the very beginning of this showed, that they're not going away. Let's try to, figure out a way to pay our bills.
Okay.
I would just caution, I mean, I'm sorry, I think they're great ideas, but if the state of Illinois is looking at it and it's a preemptive tax, we may put it in for a year, it's not gonna be a big boom to us, and it's gonna be temporary. So I think, while it's a great idea and I'm all for,
$112,000.
sustainability and all that, I also want to be mindful, I mean, we're talking about revenue increases, and I don't want to use your time foolishly, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
If you don't think it's worth $119,000.
We can check with our legislators and see if they probably may have a handle on if something like this will move forward or not. I'm not sure how much traction it got last time, but they may be able to tell us and give us an indication on whether next year's likely.
Mm-hmm.
And there would need to be discussion, if we were to move forward with this, what retailers does this apply to? Does this apply to, Celebrate downtown? Does it, apply,
Compared to Hy-Vee.
right, or does it just to Walgreens and CVS and Hy-Vee? These are things to consider.
Do we have any data that shows what the effect of the businesses was, of those cities that implemented this?
I would say, from what I read, there certainly was public outcry and frustration at the onset of this, and businesses not happy about the administration of reporting and collecting and setting it up in their cashier systems, et cetera. So not popular. I think, if council wanted us to move forward with this, marketing it, to be a sustainability initiative supporting causes more so than the general fund is kind of my instinct.
The Did You Know campaigns, 50% of the tax on your bags goes to clean up the parks. It hits the sustainability, why makes Rock Island a good progressive place to live.
Stephanie, a quick question on this. So, again, to keep track of the bags, you say they set something up in the teller lanes?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the cost to the businesses to set that up in there? There's an added cost to them.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, you gotta look,
Like they have the question, do you have your savings card? They just said, did they use a plastic bag?
But I'm saying if they have to set up a software in their register, that's another expense that you're
Aldo
tacking
makes
onto
them do
these
it.
businesses.
Well, that's why.
You know, it's probably like Aldi, if you buy a bag there, they charge you for the bag. So I assume the who's ever at the cash register keeps track, I used 5 bags, and they just write that in as a miscellaneous fee on their bag fee. It's probably just a button. We can check and see how difficult it is, but I think it's probably fairly simple.
It wouldn't be
I think
wouldn't
that's
be
a
much
good
more than any
point,
other.
but I also want to add to what Randy said, which is, that's a good reason to give the retailer, for example,
Right.
50% of the
Mhm.
cost.
Yeah, that's why I suggested
To
that.
help them defer whatever additional expenses they might have.
Thank you for the feedback. All right, let's talk about plastic straws. How are we doing on time? 5:41, we have 4 minutes. Oh, gosh. What
Oh,
do you
just
think,
keep
Randy?
going, you're good.
All right. All right, plastic straw tax. 500 million plastic straws used per day worldwide. That's a fun fact. And they have about a 20-minute lifespan. Again, kind of similar discussion here. Frustration by businesses, not a typical tax. Revenue wouldn't necessarily continue. Again, hypothetical is hard, to come up with, but I just threw some numbers together, kind of based on some of our major businesses, how many hours they're in operation, just kind of supposition. At 2 cents per 2.7 million straws would come to about $54,000. There are no examples in the state of Illinois for a straw tax.
And I think a lot of businesses are voluntarily doing away with them, so
See that a
I
lot.
think this would be a very short-lived tax.
It's only 50K estimated revenue?
Yeah, and again, my estimates, it's numbers you can play with. If you don't think my estimates are correct, I don't have anything to base
No,
it
I
on,
don't
but-
question it. I'm just saying that's a low return on investment for, I mean, I am thoughtful of people's unhappiness, and for $50,000, I don't know if it's worth taxing every straw in the city of Rock Island.
This may or may not be the place to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up because it's related to litter, plastic straws, paper cups, paper bags, paper and foil, and things that are generally related to fast food. I've had some input or feedback that we might want to consider what we could possibly do to, maybe, I don't know if it would be through a tax or not, but try to do something with carry-out food, so if you're taking bags and things out of the restaurant or the fast food store, there might be a way to have a fee for that that would maybe help try to cut down on people littering in the community.
Such as a takeout tax, that sort of thing?
I don't know, it's just just presented to me today, so
Okay.
a
Interesting.
takeout tax, if you want to call it that,
Interesting.
would be something we could think about.
Isn't the tax already different if you eat in or take it out?
I didn't hear the beginning of your question.
Is the
Sorry.
taxes already different if you eat in or take it out?
No.
Okay.
I like that idea, though.
I do like that idea.
All right, entertainment and amusement tax. So this is fairly common, and even in the state of Illinois, many municipalities do charge a tax that apply to admission, video rentals, tickets for event centers. Taxes seem to range from 3 to 9%. There's some cons and some pros, and one thing, if this were passed, is you can carve out certain entities so that they would not be subject to the tax, such as nonprofits.
Do we have legal authority to tax Netflix as a municipality?
I am not sure.
I know that the state of Illinois considered including that in the 2020 budget, right? And then it got yanked, I think. And I was just curious if
Yeah,
a
not
local
sure.
government can do that.
So we do have some examples here. So Bloomington, East Moline, Evanston. So Bloomington has a 4% tax. East Moline, we're going to come back and talk about that because that's a local example. Evanston has a 4% tax, Lombard 5%. Moline, as a local example, they do have a tax, but it's worded in such a way that it only applies to the Civic Center and all goes back to the Civic Center. Norridge, Round Lake Beach, Tinley Park, Villa Park. The common theme here is that most of these municipalities do have larger venues, generally movie theaters is a big one, but concert venues, etc. Going back up to East Moline, there, as you know, their tax was passed earlier this year. And basically how it's worded applies to 4 businesses. And then some other, entertainment things that can happen. So it is new. I did talk to Annika, and she's estimating her next year's revenue from this source at $50,000, with 70% of it coming from the Rust Belt, so the concert venue that some of you might have been to already. But it is on admissions and amusement devices, and I do provide a what-if scenario here, and that total, if based on my estimates at a 3% tax, would come to about $12,000 a year. I pause for comment.
So our venues, which aren't listed there, but there's no reporters here, so do you want to go over the venues that you looked at there, if you can
Sure.
remember?
So yeah, this was one I've done quite some time ago, but venue 1 would actually be Circa 21, with approximately 36 events a year, 200 tickets per event, average cost of $35. Venue 2 represents the Botanical Center. Venue 3 represents QCCA. 5 events there because they are a nonprofit. Not all of their events are for profit. And then venue 4 is roughly RIBCO, our district events.
What are the 2 revenue columns? I don't,
So that their gross revenue, so the venue's gross revenue is the first revenue, and then last revenue would be the actually tax. So the tax times that.
And this would then be events like Gumbo Yaya, You Make My Weekend, the Nelly concert this weekend, all of those type of events that happen in the district would be included. Ribco's obviously our largest music venue. They're small, but there's quite a few concerts there. And then the QCCA and Botanical Center are both nonprofit. However, they do have for-profit people that come in and run some of those. So the tax would be on those for-profit people, not on the nonprofit organization. We'd have to word that as such. I don't think the council wants to attach a tax to the nonprofits. If they do, we could do school sporting events and all kinds of things, I guess.
so we're looking at like $10,000 a year in revenue?
Yeah, roughly 12,000 is the number here, but it is an estimate.
Stephanie, I got Circa 21, Botanical Center, RIBCO. Which one did I miss?
The third one was QCCA.
Okay,
Bless you. 4th venue, RIBCO.
got it.
Although when I was thinking RIBCO, I was thinking district.
The
but,
district events, yeah.
Yeah.
I like the idea of that revenue source as it pertains to the district, especially if there was some money that was then returned back to that area for beautification efforts.
Yeah, I like that idea too. I don't know how, like, the Botanical Center or the QCCA would benefit from that, right?
But isn't that up to the city to decide which venues are being,
No, yeah,
which ones are,
It is.
it is.
right. So I'm saying just at least in that particular instance, I feel that, they get some pretty high volume events in the district, the Gumbo Yaya, You Make It My Weekend, a couple concerts here and there. And if we're gonna be promoting that area for future concerts as a revenue area, or maybe even Schwiebert or some other venues, it would make sense to take some of that money and return it back to
Marketing.
to beautifying, marketing, all those kind of things that are associated with that. I like that idea for there, anyway.
You know, the revenue for that is $600 estimated, but I think it would probably be a little higher than that, but you're talking a couple of thousand probably.
Yeah.
Would be so is it worth the heartache of charging somebody? That's the question. But basically, for the district, you'd be charging Kyle at Daiquiri Factory. He does all the district events now, so it would be
One of the things that appealed to me about this whole concept of an amusement or entertainment tax was that a lot of people come from outside of Rock Island to some of these venues that we've been talking about. And some of them just come from our sister cities, but others come from farther away on buses. I saw 6 tour buses downtown within the last week on the same day, at the same time. 3 were in front of Circuit 21 and 3 more were parked a block away. I assume they had already unloaded their passengers, but that's revenue coming from outside the city into the city coffers without necessarily being all dependent on city residents.
And Circa is the biggest one here, obviously.
Are we considering remitting a portion of this one as well to the business owners to offset their accounting?
You know, we had not, because this really is trying to get additional revenue for the general fund. And it really is not a significant amount anyway, so if you remit some back, you could, but then there's,
They're busing these people in from Geneseo and
oh, everywhere.
everywhere, so I don't care. They're coming here, we're tax them anyway. They're still gonna come because it's their $25, payment to the library that brings them out to something. Yeah, it's the easy tax.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we need to figure this out.
It's not gonna deter them from coming to Circuit because there's a $5 tax.
I think my only concern with this is I just feel like we're taxing Circa. I mean, the others are, we're not gonna probably do the nonprofits, but, and if Revenue 4 is the downtown district area, I mean, that's fine, but I just, I'm very concerned about, we lost Comedy Sports, and I'm just really concerned about driving businesses out of town.
But we lost Comedy Sports, but now they have Center for the Living Arts that sells tickets. They're doing 3 performances of Frozen, which is at 3 nights, which is they're maxed out at 280 seats. Those are 280 seats we couldn't tax before too. So we're not just targeting Circa, now we can start collecting taxes, which we couldn't do with Comedy Sports. We know those are guaranteed every spring and winter. They're doing 3 choruses of 3 different shows. And they sell the shows out. That's why they moved to the bigger theater. That's 280 tickets. I mean, it's not gonna deter Grandpa and Grandma from coming to watch Violet.
Would nonprofit entities like
not-
the center?
Well, they're not, they're a for-profit entity.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
Thought they were a nonprofit. I would
No, they're not. They don't have an
I would share Jenny's, Alderwoman Swanson's concern of, we're just taxing Circa. And if we want to do something to charge the business owners downtown for the benefit of downtown, we should probably just pursue an SSA or something with a lot more understood that, yeah, this is what we're paying in, this is what we're getting for kind of thing, as aside from, and again, it's like $12,000. It's not a lot of money when you're at a $140 million budget.
All right, should we move on? Real estate transfer tax.
I didn't get a definite of how you want us to move here.
Yes.
So, before you take a tally, I'm not understanding why you're saying we're just taxing Circa.
We're not, it's an exaggeration. We're not
I mean,
only,
if you look at it, who else are you taxing?
Center for Living Arts.
They're not on here. So, I mean, I'm for taxing it as long as we make it an equal and I agree with Alderman Parker, I'd rather see an SSA than taxing the businesses like this. I mean, for $12,000, is it really worth what we're trying to do here? I mean, as I said before, I am worried about businesses leaving because you can't get to a point where it is no longer desirable to be here. And it's not like there are not a lot of other places you could go, because there are. So, I mean, if we want to do it, that's fine, but I mean, I think of, you know, like Roztalks, they do entertainment. I mean, let's do a broader scope
Well, you can't
of
target one business.
other entertainment things, because I see here the bulk of it is really Circa. I mean, you're looking at $7,500 from Circa, and you're looking at $600 from events in the district. I am sorry, but no matter how you look at it, you're taxing Circa.
Well, they have the largest volume, and it would include things like Roztalks. They have, their crowds are much smaller than some of these other venues, so Stephanie just included the larger ones, but there'd be some nickel and dime things of a few hundred a year probably on here.
Well, maybe we don't do free concerts at Schwiebert. Maybe we charge for those.
Yeah, we
You know,
considering.
you'd get more money out of doing something like that than you would a tax like this.
Yeah, are we considering Schwiebert as a venue? Do we not have for-profit entities that rent it out for events, that charge tickets?
We do. And keep in mind, my estimates were just to give some perspective to what a tax, how much it could accumulate to. So it's not meant to be inclusive. We haven't drafted ordinance language, so it's just, today is just more for discussion purposes and.
Yeah, and we had the
feeling.
Dawn and On Festival, you know, that would be one that would be, so if we entice more events to come downtown, then obviously there'd be more taxes there, but the majority would be Circa because they have the largest crowd. And their ticket prices are pretty hefty too, so the 35 represents food. I mean, not food, the entertainment portion, because you can't tax them on the food, they're already being taxed on the food and beverage, so. That represents the entertainment portion, and they've got by far the largest crowd, so they would get the brunt of the tax here because they have the brunt of the tickets sold.
So what's like the actual legal language for an amusement or something, you know, or an admission? How do we make sure that the show at Theo's, the show at Roztalks, the show at, I mean, all these little,
Yeah, and we've got standard language on that, that's fairly easy.
and do we audit them? I mean,
It
how
would-
do we
it would be-
track that stuff?
The problem is it would be difficult, most of those are cash at the door,
Right.
they don't sell tickets, so it would be very difficult to collect something from them. Labor intensive for the small amount you'd get from some of the small venues, definitely.
So again, effectively, we would not be taxing the Roztalks of Rock Island. We would effectively be taxing just these larger institutions, the QCCA, the Botanical Center, Circa, arguably Circa.
And I would say, using East Moline's example, if any venue that's for-profit charges a door fee or an amusement fee, it would apply.
Right.
You can always craft language, if the venue's less than so many square feet or something along those lines, if there are certain entities that you want to cut out. But, it would, in East Moline, it would apply to them if we started with East Moline's model ordinance.
Well, I would say that I'm not in favor of this, but I am in favor of taxing Netflix if we can do that. Because we're going to make a lot more money off of taxing everybody's streaming services than we are one businesses.
I would be careful about eliminating the things that are seemingly reasonable that other communities are doing
Yeah.
before we have a chance to let the process work out a little bit more. I would not eliminate this. I would keep it in the mix, and then I'm sure we're gonna have another round or two when we get more information from staff.
Oh, well, no, we'd move forward with this. It'd come before you with as an ordinance.
Agenda item.
Yeah.
So East Moline's not afraid of it, Moline's not afraid of it.
Well, Moline does not charge their venues, though, like their theaters and their bars and their other entertainment venues. They only charge the Civic Center, and it does go back to the Civic Center 100%.
They charge iWireless?
They do, but it all goes back to iWireless. So they don't keep any of the money.
No, it's their fault.
Stephanie, is this something that we could tax only, let's just take Ribco, for example. So, again, we'll use this weekend's concert as a ticket prices. I'm not sure what they're running, but I'm sure they're up there a little bit for this show. And
40 plus.
Yeah, so these kind of events that come in, can we solely do it to those type of things as opposed to applying this tax to some of the smaller entertainment venues, I guess? I mean, because they're charging $40 a ticket, and I'm sure that's gonna sell quite a few tickets. That would be a reasonable tax, I would think, on a bigger
Some
market.
places do it by size, don't they? So if your venue is a certain size, I don't know how you'd handle an outdoor concert. We'd have to figure that out. But some would, so you would eliminate the Rostox and any of the small.
$5 or less, don't, worry about paying the
Or
tax. But if it's-
$20 or more, or
Yeah,
something like
I don't
that,
know.
where they're gonna.
We would need some legal research on that, but we could do that.
I mean, that way you're not gonna tax the smaller venues, but on the other hand, you start getting, we usually get 1 or 2 big shows a year here. Those might be the ones that, you sell hundreds of tickets. That might be a good one to tax a percentage on.
I would tax it probably on the size of the crowd then.
Right.
So typically, the smaller venues can only hold 250 people, 175 people. But, Billy Bob's, for instance, can hold almost 900,
700.
700. That may be a venue, you may put the limit at 500 and then charge that venue for it, because they have a lot of shows. And that's one that wasn't considered here because it was new
Well,
at the time.
I will say, though, on their behalf, they do donate a lot of money back to the city, as far as I know, they take a portion of their proceeds from the door. And some of their money, as far as I know, it goes to nonprofits, I'm sorry, not to the city.
Yeah, still, I mean,
But they're already giving back.
mhm.
So, something to think
So
about.
we want to move ahead with this?
Yes.
Only if we remit a portion of it to the business owner.
Well, I can fund the district events.
No, I mean,
Oh,
I would like to just have it go to the general fund if we're gonna do it, and then we do an SSA or something like that for the downtown.
Well, that's what we would
Improvements.
propose, because it's such a small amount, we would want to take it to the,
Then yes.
if you're going to give some of it back to the business, it doesn't make sense to do it, because then there isn't enough money to make it worthwhile. The administrative effort alone would be overwhelming for the small amount
I
of
think
money.
it's only if we restrict it to, like we were talking about, a certain, amount of tickets sold. I really am not
But again, that gets
not
back
in
to,
favor of the small venues getting
that gets back to
taxed.
what Stephanie was saying of, if they're charging people at the door, and let's say 50 people is the cutoff, after 50 people, then you have to tax it. Well, they've been billing people $5 to come in, they get up to 50 people, and now all of a sudden they have to pay taxes on all of those tickets, and they haven't been charging the consumer those taxes, so now they have to eat that amount, because they didn't know how many people were gonna show
It
up.
would be the size of the club, so how many can fit into the club? So we would tax a venue.
Outdoor events.
Well, like the one
Well,
this
that's
weekend.
what I
they-
said, we'd have to craft that, but some places have, it's like, for instance, Moline is 8,000 seat and above. So we could craft it, 1,000 and above or something, which cuts out all of the bars. You don't have to worry about the bars, but all the outside events get more than
And-
1,000 tickets.
Well, and if you're gonna do that, though, how many seats really are in Circa? The reason that they have the highest amount of revenue is that they have 30 times as many events as everybody else. So it's not necessarily that they have a larger crowd, they just have more frequent events, right?
Right.
So if we limit it to a venue, events with 300 people or higher, then we've cut out Circa, and now we have then we're not taxing anybody.
If we're gonna tax them, then tax
Downtown events and QCCA, I guess, would be the two. So I guess we need some guidance on what,
You have to remember the goal here. The goal is new revenue.
Right.
So I'd say tax it.
I mean, if you look at our graph that Stephanie had,
Like the 1%
With
sales
the-
tax in the county.
expenses versus revenues, we're going in the wrong direction. We gotta get more new revenue.
Those buses will still come from other towns, we'll just tax them on it.
so we're,
Looking for a concept, no.
we'll move ahead and we'll tax all venues with live entertainment. That's where we'll start.
That'd be good. Humorous.
And I also
Guys,
think we need to charge for Thursday concerts. No more free concerts.
They have concerts.
well, that's a separate issue, so, that is put on by the Parks Department. We need to look at that as a separate event. I guess when the parks budget comes up, I would bring that up, that no more free shows, because we do have those all over the place, and that would be,
Oh, Moline does it every Thursday, and all theirs are free. And if we want to attract those same people and have liquor sales, I say we don't monkey.
yeah, but that would be bring up during the parks budget. We would bring that up.
Next.
All right, real estate transfer tax. So real estate transfer tax, sometimes called a transfer stamp, and the state and county already have a tax that they charge, and this is a common tax throughout the state of Illinois, especially in the suburbs. Home rule units may pass such a tax. The challenge, though, is that you do need voter approval by referendum to do so. So the tax tends to be paid by the seller, $3 to $5 per $1,000 of sales price, and there's currently over 65 municipalities in the state of Illinois that have such a tax. You can have certain situations where you exempt a purchaser or transaction from the tax. Perhaps it's a deed from one family member to another, senior citizen exemption, et cetera. There are pros to this. It allows the municipality to know when a property changes hands. It also allows a municipality to charge fees that are owed to it, so you can withhold the ability for that transfer stamp to be issued. So it is a nice collection tool. And again, a major con is that a referendum would be needed. The what-if scenario, I just took an estimate of the number of residential parcels that sold in 2018, roughly $100,000, and then 5 businesses, and so total sales 24 million. So from a tax perspective, if it was a $5 per $1,000 tax, it would be $122,000 in revenue. This is a revenue that will fluctuate. Sometimes you might have a multi-million-dollar parcel that sells, and you have kind of a boon, and in other years you might not have a whole lot. So, but it is pretty common. Some good examples, but a challenge would be seeking voter approval.
I would say yes.
What's our plan to sell it to the constituents?
Well, so we would want to do this if we can get the other communities on board. That would be kind of try to get the county on board with it.
Right.
So we're not the unique, we already take a beating on selling houses, even though it's a small amount.
Or a minimum, one thing I have learned is that it is just home rule. It's a home rule tax. I don't know that like Milan and Coal Valley would be able to pass such a tax. So at a minimum, we would want to talk to the folks over at Moline and see if they were interested in doing it too. Maybe a combined marketing campaign, putting something out to referendum without some marketing and education, it would likely fail.
Sounds like Jason Wild's got his new directive.
Well, we'd have to devote some serious money to this in order to market it properly, because no one's gonna vote for a tax. So we would have to really campaign for this thing.
Randy, you mentioned having to coordinate or go through, I'm not sure what words you used exactly, the county in conjunction with other.
Well, I like to get the
Rock Island
other
County.
home rule municipalities which is currently East Moline still is.
East Moline's still non-home rule.
Oh,
so,
that's right, they're
yeah.
not, they're hoping to get to home rule.
Moline and
if they-
Rock Island are the only home rule.
It'd be nice
the
if we
county.
weren't the only ones that did it, because then it just is a negative, another thing against Rock Island and housing, as we already have the property tax issue.
Right,
So we'd like to get,
would they have to be home rule municipalities then?
Yeah, because otherwise they don't have the authority to do this.
So you're only looking at Rock Island and Moline?
Yes, we could just do it with Rock Island. We could ask Jason to, give us a quote on what would it take to, have a good marketing plan to get voter approval. We could go forward just with Rock Island.
Yeah, Randy, you've been saying for, feels like a few years now, but I haven't been on council for that many years. But, where are our conversations with Moline? Are they gonna, is this just a stalling or what?
conversations with Moline on this.
Yeah.
Well, they have to, you know, I don't know, they have to get a stable administrator in there first before we can.
All right, so then,
We haven't had a conversation on this particular thing. We're bringing it forward to council to see if council is interested in it. This thing we haven't particularly talked about in detail yet, this particular tax.
Moline fired their city administrator?
Or she quit, one of the two.
What was that, less than 5 months?
Resignation letter was turned in as far as.
Less than 5 months on the job?
next, so,
I would say find out from Moline if they're interested, and if they're interested, maybe we can pursue it, and if they're not, then we probably shouldn't.
I,
Good.
let's do it and say, Moline, if you want to hop on, we can split the costs of the marketing campaign. If
Well,
not,
But I think it is, like, as Randy said, it is another negative against moving here.
Right.
I understand.
One thing that gives me a little bit of pause about it is it's, again, relying on property owners. You know, besides the regular annual property tax, it's just another property.
Yeah, but it's
But it's only when you sell.
only when you sell.
So just don't sell your house.
No,
Keep
why
living
would
here.
you want to leave Rock
As long as you're a
Island
good
anyway?
resident, keep
Because I
living
want to
here.
sell my house and move to Friendship Manor.
Then you just roll it into your mortgage anyway. Nobody ever notices how much it is, and
I hear they're building nice new villas.
You can have a senior citizen exemption. Not
All
that
right,
you're a
you-
senior citizen or anything.
You have 3 minutes to run through the next couple, so.
3 minutes, home rule use tax. Often hear about taxing used cars, and so this is something that we could do fairly easily. It would just be filing the ordinance with the state, but it's actually collected locally. And so it would mostly apply to cars and boats, home rule use tax. So if we were to do a 1% tax, doesn't amount to a whole lot. And again, these are my estimates. I have no idea how many cars a used car lot sells, or what the average is, but it seemed reasonable. So there's some numbers for you too. I would say if you want to give any feedback to Randy, he could collect it. Is that okay, Randy, if we do that?
Sure, yeah, if you want to think about this, then let me know.
I have a question to ask about it. Does this not only apply to cars, but also include things like motor homes, motorcycles, boats?
Yes.
Okay.
while we're talking about used car lots, the last city council did not want to pursue an ordinance like the city of Davenport has, where it limits the number of cars that can be on the property to the number of bays that the building has, right? So if you have one bay in the car lot, you can only have 12 cars on the property. If you have 2 bays, you can have 20 cars. If you have 16 bays, you can have 300 cars, or whatever, whatever the numbers are. The last city council did not want to pursue it. Can we do something like that with our new friends on council?
That would be something to talk about separately from this.
Okay. I'll bring it up during other
Yeah, your
business
friends on
tonight.
council.
So do you want to move forward on this one then? So it would be boats, so it'd be Ted's Boatorama you'll hear from Ted.
Yep. I'm in favor of it.
Okay,
All right, vehicle stickers. So the city of Rock Island had vehicle stickers at one time. So the next two would actually be a good segue into whatever Mike's going to talk about on streets really quick, which is really important. So these revenues would support street infrastructure. I brought a prop today. Everybody knows I like antiques. I have a lot of cool stuff in my office. That's Rock Island memorabilia. So this is the 1956 city of Rock Island's vehicle sticker. So kind of cool. But
You had to pay to have a car in the city?
what?
You had to pay to have a car in the city?
You had to have a sticker on your car.
It was an annual fee. I know that when we
For
used to
decades.
enforce it, it was like $4 a car.
Could be preservationists coming back with cool old stickers.
We could definitely do some retro things. But so the city did have this at one time. Many municipalities have this. Mike Bartels and I did watch closely Mercer counties. So the county of Mercer tried to pass such a tax, and it was voted down by the board, did not proceed. And that was pretty recently, just the beginning of the summer, if I recall. Not popular with residents. There is definitely a cost and an administrative burden to administer. I know this personally. Had this at my last employer. They were due April 30th. My birthday was April 29th. We were always open late on April 29th, and it took us till midnight to balance the cash registers every night. So I went 13 years without a birthday. But so if we do it, let's not have them do then. But at any rate, here's some examples. Nothing local though. Municipalities, they usually have a range of fees. smaller fees for motorcycles, bigger fees for bigger axle trucks and RVs and that kind of things, often discounts for veterans, disabled, senior citizens, et cetera. But there you have a range of fees, high end in Chicago, close to $500, but the average is 25 to 50. And so with that in play, gave you some estimated annual revenue if we were to do that. So taking our population and a statistical reference to how many cars are likely here, you get this list from the state of Illinois, from the Secretary of State, you buy it each year. A $25 sticker rate would be about $1.4 million in estimated annual revenue, and there's definitely a cost to administer the software, cost to get the data, cost to administer, banking fees, et cetera, and cost of the stickers.
1.4 million would be our revenue,
Yes,
and the cost is only 59,000.
roughly estates.
So would that be good revenue for the city?
It would all go to streets, so it wouldn't offset any of the general fund, but it would be street revenue, but
Oh, we need
wildly,
street revenue.
wildly unpopular, and,
As long
it
as
would
we-
hit the poorest population hardest because it's a flat fee.
Well, as long as we exempt plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles.
No, we would not exempt those because they don't pay gas tax. We may even charge extra for those.
We want to be a sustainable community.
It doesn't matter,
No,
it's
they
either all
tear
or
up our
nothing.
roads. They tear
Because
up our
otherwise
roads.
you can say, my beat-up car that is falling apart, why do I have to pay $50 for it?
Get it
What
off the
about,
street.
what about making the
hear you,
fee a percentage of the value of the car?
How that,
That makes it complicated?
oh, wow, yeah.
I mean,
I'm in
is it,
favor
that's
of
how
this.
over in Iowa, that's how they do their annual registration, right?
And other states do, California does that too, but I would say from a local municipality standpoint, that would be difficult to have that,
Okay.
but it's
I'm in
something that
favor
we
of
could
this
do.
idea.
Value is subjective too sometimes.
I notice in your chart of, this is the slide before this one, range of fees, there's like a low of 20 and a high of 200, or well, 465 for Chicago. So it could be set at anything we want. I would be in favor of a lower fee to help cushion the cost to people, to moderate to low income people, but that would lower it for everybody. It would be the same across the board.
I would say senior citizens, veterans, and disabled should be exempt. Those three groups on a flat rate, and maybe motorcycles like less, because they're only really being driven a few months a year,
And only two wheels.
and two wheels.
Yeah, they don't tear up the road too bad.
This is a tricycle.
Okay, some good feedback. Any other ideas? Pass them along to the city manager. And then the last one, really quick, is transportation utility fee. Basically, exactly that word utility. So it's treating your streets as a utility, much like stormwater, water, refuse, etc. It's paid by property occupants based on their use of the land. Trip-generated calculation is often used. There are no examples in the state of Illinois. There's a lot of examples in the Pacific Northwest, especially Oregon. Also some other states in the Southwest. A what-if scenario is if we administered this through our utility billing system, assuming we could add another line in our utility billing system, 15,000 accounts, just kind of using a graduated lower rate in year one and moving to a higher rate, you can see what the annual revenue could be. So basically, anywhere from 1.7 to $2 million. And then my last slide is, there are definitely legal challenges with this kind of fee. It would be uncharted waters here in the state of Illinois. Been following legal action in Mission, Kansas, as an example over the last few years since we first started looking at this. When I first started looking at this anyway in 2016, and Mission, Kansas has now been ordered to repay the taxes that they had collected. But it is in place. Other places, there are some good case studies and models to use out of Oregon if we wanted to be on the bleeding edge of this.
Stephanie, what is meant by paid by property occupants based on land use intensity?
So basically, a multi-unit property like an apartment building would have a higher amount due to them. A single family residents would have a smaller amount due to them, much like stormwater is kind of based on, size of impermeable areas. So it would kind of the same kind of concept. This would be treated as a utility and related to some sort of measurement of how often they might send cars out onto the streets. Businesses might have a higher trip calculator is another way that they often will calculate. There's guidelines, engineering guidelines for trip calculators.
Well, yeah, I say research legality and consider the last line there.
Well, we won't know if it's legal until someone challenges it. Because it's not been done in Illinois. We would just have to do it.
Well, we could have our legal counsel give us an opinion on whether he thinks we have the constitutional right to do that, right?
So
Yeah,
would-
what we do, I mean, someone's gonna challenge it. And
So would it be a flat fee per residence? I mean, you talk about trip calculator, I guess I'm not understanding.
Probably would
that.
have to be structured as a tax where there's different grades of how much someone's charged. So it would be by parcel size, by type of parcel, resident, commercial, size of, if it's multi-unit, that kind of.
So just my gut reaction to this is it doesn't make as much sense, I should say, as the vehicle stickers. Because the vehicle sticker, you know if you have a car or two or three, that you're gonna pay for those, and that's gonna go to street maintenance. Basing it on it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it's not based on vehicles, it's based on your property again.
well, so it is sort of, so it's the property use, so like an apartment complex has more vehicles than a single family. A business that attracts a lot of vehicles has more than a small business. That's what other states have done. I wouldn't, if you are leaning towards one of these, the vehicle sticker would be the one that is much easier, but both these are gonna be wildly unpopular and just wanna make sure the council has a stomach for
What about
that.
What about taxing based on the number of parking spots a business has? I mean, is that done?
I have not seen examples, but it's
That
possible.
would be a clear indication of how much somebody is using, or like driveway space or something like that. Because I would agree, I mean, you have a downtown residence, you have a downtown apartment, high density, how many of those people are using cars, right? I mean, they're walking or they're using a
Yeah,
bicycle.
most of ours probably are, though.
Correct, but there's not, at least from the public's perspective, there's not as much as a correlation between the type of property I have and the amount that I tear up the roads as there is a vehicle tearing up the roads. Or parking spaces, that's pretty clearly, you're using that to park a vehicle that got there by driving on the roads.
Some thoughts. Let's bring Mike up, and Mike, just go through the first presentation there. You have about 12 minutes.
I'll be right back.
And I'll need to know from each of you if you want to move ahead on this vehicle sticker
You're asking.
individually. Yeah, you don't need to tell me right now, but that's something we need. I didn't get a word on that, but we are the only city that does it. And again, that's something where, come to Rock Island, if you have 3 vehicles, we're gonna charge you this fee, but it's something to think about. But let me know independently so we can decide if we want to move ahead with that.
All right.
All right, well, I'm going to talk about street funding for 2020 tonight. Some pictures you have in front of you there are, that picture on the left is 27th Street between 8th and 9th Avenue. And the picture on the right is 38th Avenue, east of 25th Street. So, reason we're having this discussion tonight, it's one of the city council's goals is to improve the street conditions throughout the city of Rock Island. It's one of Public Works' #1 complaints that we receive. It actually is our #1 complaint from residents. Quality streets retain and attract residents to the city of Rock Island. streets in good condition, increase home values, and encourage residents to maintain property to the same standard. In 2018, looked this up today, we had 2,106 calls related to street complaints and conditions. That's about 5% of our population here. Revenues for 2020, we have the existing motor fuel tax. We receive around $970,000. The new tax that was implemented July 1, we expect to receive about $570,000 from that. The reason that is not as much as the 970 is it's a different percent of share. So the historic tax was 26.7% to make the 970, and this new tax is only 15.7, which is where we come with the 570. And then the local gas tax that you all created and dedicated to street maintenance. Thank you very much for that. We're looking forward to using that this coming year. We also have the gaming that we use. It's a small percentage. We used to get a lot more of gaming. We now have been getting about $170,000 a year to use of gaming funds.
Used to get millions from that fund.
Yeah. So with the current uses of the funding, motor fuel tax, MFT, is used to pay for in-house street maintenance activities such as street sweeping, pothole patching, et cetera. These funds can also be used for maintenance contracts and street projects such as reconstruction and resurfacing. I think it was last year or the year before, we did a big pavement patching contract on the expressway out in southwest Rock Island of about almost $400,000 we use for MFT funds. We also use this fund for purchasing bulk road salt for our snow operations. And then gaming funds we have historically used for our street maintenance programs, asphalt patching, brick patching, pavement patching, et cetera. So 2020 projects that we expect to use the funding for that we're talking about tonight. Blackhawk Hills Drive reconstruction. We looking to use pretty much the new amount that we're receiving, we started receiving in July 1 for that project. This is gonna be a 2-year project next year and then in 2021 due to the amount of the project and the cost.
Valley Drive, is that over in?
It's west of 30th Street on top, just up the hill from Blackhawk Road.
Yeah, across from the cemetery there.
Am I one?
That's mine.
It's 4.
Moving on down the line here, so general street maintenance, that is the $970,000 we talked about previously. Couple things to point out with that is that a big majority of that motor fuel tax goes to labor and equipment of Public Works personnel. So while it's an amount and we talk about budgeting for 2020 projects, a big percentage of that is used towards our employees for their labor and equipment of cost. And then salt purchases as well. We have almost $350,000 that we're expecting to use that for. The gas tax that was implemented this year, we are looking at doing a pavement patching program and a sidewalk program. Of the $450,000, we're looking to do $200,000 of the mill and fill project, and we'll talk about that here later in this presentation. And then another $250,000 of concrete patching, and then $50,000 of sidewalk replacement. That'll all be lumped into one contract. And then our maintenance programs from the gaming funds, brick pavement patching and pavement striping. This is just a sample of how the MFT expenditures broke out for 2018. And that's what I was just talking about. When you look at this, a big majority of the funds are spent on general maintenance of streets, such as street sweeping, pothole patching. 57% of the funding was used on labor and equipment costs for personnel and salt purchases. So how do we determine how much funding is needed? The picture there is 6th Avenue, west of 35th Street near Augustana. And the other picture on the right is 12th Avenue between 20th and 23rd Street. How do we determine how much funding? So in 2013, we did a street condition survey. This is basically going out and surveying our streets. They have a vehicle. They divide the sections of road up into frames and segments, and then they evaluate those areas and determine a pavement condition index rating. And that's a value that's determined and tabulated. And then with that, the results of that survey, you determine maintenance recommendations and cost.
That's been done how many years ago? 5 years ago?
That was done in the end of 2013. We didn't get the information until 2014. It was completed to develop an accurate database of street conditions and also help determine how much funding is needed along with maintenance recommendations. So if I flip over here to this next one.
So we just kind of take the survey and work on it.
I'm sorry.
We just take the survey and just update it, just make it work. so it goes forward.
So there's, you're supposed to have it updated every 5 years.
So it's coming up in the-
It would be, and there's a cost to do that. So the information is good. We know our streets are going to deteriorate further unless we've improved those. So the value to resurvey, I'm not sure if it would be considered since we have the initial data.
Not like we've repaired a lot. in the
What's
last-
that?
Said it's not like we've repaired a lot in the last.
Well, we've done some.
38th Street, anything like that?
Yeah.
So the PCI index number, the rating that we give to the streets after they're surveyed is here. Very good to excellent is 71 to 100. Fair to good is 41 to 70, and failed to poor is 0 to 40. Looking at those numbers, if we go back to the first slide and you look at PCI values, that picture on the left is a rating of 10, and the one on the right is 28.
That's not good.
Yeah.
And this is what the ranking of the streets from the overall survey of how they rated. And you can see we had 41% in the very good to excellent, 43% in the fair to good, and 16% in the 0 to 40 or failed to poor. And the big conclusions of the study was the average PCI of the city was 65, was projected to be at 62 at the end of 2014. Majority of the distresses were load and climate related. They said their streets are in better shape than expected given their age. Streets are rougher than expected. And I highlighted these last two. So 7.2 million per year to keep the PCI at the current level over the next 20 years is what was estimated we needed to dedicate to streets just to maintain
Maintain that poor rate.
the current level. And 5.4 million per year we estimated the need just to keep it at a PCI of 55. This is a map of the overall ratings. I'm sorry, it's poor. You can't really see it real well, but it gives you the general idea. So red is poor, yellow is fair, and green is good.
I can't see that.
We look at neighboring cities to the east. These are what they're putting out for their revenues for streets. This revenue shown are what is used for street maintenance and capital improvement projects. General fund, motor fuel tax, and utility taxes are included in these revenues. I did not include any grants or utility funding. No grants or utility funding was included in the revenue shown, just because the grants aren't received annually, and you have to go out and apply for those, and they're not a given. So, and actually, if you think about it, when you look at the motor fuel tax, approximately 600,000 of the 2.2 that we're showing is really removed because that's going towards personnel and equipment cost. So how much does it cost per block on average for the different types of construction that we utilize here in Rock Island? The mill and fill project was just removing 1.5 inches of the existing asphalt and replacing it, including the ADA ramps where needed. It's about $207,000 per block, and this does include some 10% in contingencies for engineering and design. The resurfacing, taking away 3 inches of asphalt and replacing the ADA ramps is about $230,000. Reconstruction with 7-inch concrete Sidewalk on one side of the street is $375,000. And if we were to reconstruct the entire street from curb to curb with sidewalks on both sides and replace the utilities underneath the street, it'd be about $750,000 per block. The current 5-year CIP, this is hard to see too, so I apologize. Only fits so much on the screen here. This is what we have currently. For the last several years, projects have been pushed out due to funding not available. The $2 million in street maintenance that you see there is to fund street maintenance programs such as mill and fill, brick program, pavement striping, pavement patching program, and seal coat program. This plan is constantly changing, mostly due to the fact that we do not have the funding to complete the projects unless it is grant funded. Just for an example, 28th Street Court has been on this 5-year plan since I started here in 2013 and has been pushed back until 2023. When looking at projects for the CIP, many factors are looked at, including the PCI rating of the street, traffic counts, complaints, utility infrastructure under the street, and other criteria. So, sum it up, significant funding is needed to keep our streets from deteriorating further. Local gas tax was a good start, but more funding is needed, and we need to continue to repair streets with the funding we have. However, we continue to fall further behind each year. This slide was the same street that was on the first slide that I showed you, 27th Street. We were able to repair this street this year. It was done in this month at a cost of about $60,000. We did not replace any sidewalk ramps. It wasn't needed, but that's about 300 feet of road, curb to curb, done in about 2 days for about $60,000. So I'm just trying to give you an example of what we can do if we have the funds available.
And what was our budget this year for that?
It was about 75, and we redistributed some funds to do about 100,000.
Yeah, so we're gonna have 200,000 next year to be able to do this kind of work, so.
And thinking, and going back to the CIP and projects and the pavement patching program of $500,000, we have looked at project locations for next year already, and we're dividing them up by ward, so it's done equally as much as possible. So each alderman or each ward area will have a street done through that project. Just to make it as fair as possible.
I do have to say, I want to really thank you and your team, because when I have called on things, you have been right there and have done an outstanding job. So I really applaud you for all you guys have done under your tight circumstances. One thing that I would like to ask, and it's not my ward, but as people come into Rock Island and come across the Centennial Bridge, 15th Street is kind of awful, but it would be really nice if we could maybe do something there, so at least as people who enter our town first come in on that main road to enter us, that it's nice.
So you're gonna be very happy, because I've been working with IDOT. That is actually not our street. That's
Okay.
Illinois 67, and that's actually in the next presentation I was gonna give about ownership of state and city responsibilities. So we maintain that street, but we only maintain it. We fill potholes, we do street sweeping. However, I called the state earlier this spring and said, look, wintertime is coming up. I got blasted by the media for the condition of that street and that intersection in front of City Hall area. It's 3rd Avenue, 2nd Avenue, whichever one it is. And I said, you should get a formulated plan to get that street done. And they said, well, we don't have any funding. We don't have the plan designed. And I said, I've already had our engineering staff design this project. We'll give you the plans. You can use them for your own, however you want to see fit. And we gave them the plans, and it's actually on a fall letting for this fall. Will be done next spring. So we'll have to suffer through that street one more winter, but
All the way to Fifth, right?
All
From
the way to Fifth
Centennial to
Avenue.
Fifth, so,
Good, it'll
and
make
completely funded by the state, no city funds in there.
but it'll be like a minefield this winter, so.
Yeah, it'll be terrible this winter, so be prepared for that.
But next year,
Take the Arsenal Bridge.
So that's my presentation on that. The last slide we hear is an alley near Augustana. I'm sure you're well aware of that one too.
so that alley and then a previous street Sixth Avenue that he showed, I've been working with Augustana, and my goal is to get them to pay half of those streets. There's an alley and a street and an avenue, and I'm trying to get them to pay half of it since they use it all the time. They want it repaired, and we'll see how that works out, but that's my goal. I've been working for 2 years on that, so we'll see.
Any questions?
are we
I know we're
gonna do,
low on time
Thanks.
here.
11th Street?
Not gonna have time to do it.
Thank you very much. And again, I'll agree with Jenny on that. You and your staff have been great about addressing issues that we've presented to you, so thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Council members, if you just keep in mind, we've got about 4 minutes before the meeting starts, so if we can just make a quick break here.
Unless council wants to do a special study session.
Well, I was disappointed especially because Jeff Condit came at my request.
So they